Welcome back. You're watching Newslink, and Parliament is clipping the wings of its former MPs. Now, it's amended its travel policy, and former ministers, deputy ministers and MPs will now only enjoy 12 domestic flights per year. It was previously 48, but Cosatu says this is not enough and the privileges should be scrapped altogether. For more on this, we're joined by Cosatu's Mathews Parks, who's going to be talking to us about the amended policies and the implications thereof. Thank you very much for your time, Mathews. Obviously, you are calling for the entire policy to be scrapped altogether because despite the amendments that were announced last week, former MPs are enjoying quite a number of privileges still at the cost of the taxpayer.
Yes, good morning. Thanks for having us. Look, I think for us it shows a complete lack of consciousness or appreciation for the economic crisis that the country is facing, that workers, the unemployed, and even the state is facing. It is beyond bizarre that Parliament still wants to indulge themselves with these kind of privileges. So yes, it is a positive step that they've reduced the amount of tickets given for each year to former members of Parliament, former ministers and their spouses, but to reduce it to 12 to a former member of Parliament and to the spouse, there's no explanation for it. There's no justification for it. When any worker leaves their job, all that they leave with is the salary that is owed to them and any leave days that are owed to them and their pension. That's it. They don't entitled to receive benefits for life. So the tickets that members of Parliament get are a tool of trade for when they're in Parliament, to be able to fly from their home provinces to Parliament, to go to their constituencies, to do oversight and political work. And that is fine. There's tickets for their spouses to accompany them as well as their children when they live in Cape Town, where Parliament is, and that also is fine. But those must only be there for when a person is a member of Parliament. When they leave Parliament, those benefits must stop. This is the very same members of Parliament who in 2020 adopted a budget which imposed a 0% increase upon nurses and doctors, upon police officers, prison wardens, and public servants in general, saying that the state is broke, there's no money to spare. As much as this is a reduction in the benefits, it's still going to cost about 22 million rand a year. It might be small in the broader scheme of things, but the principle is what is sacrosanct, and that is key that we be seen as Parliament to be reducing a culture, a bling lifestyle. So really it's unfathomable. Parliament should develop a sense of consciousness, a solidarity with the poor, and should simply scrap all benefits for former members of Parliament, let alone the spouses. There's no justification to be giving the spouse of someone who is a member of Parliament free tickets when the person is not even a member of Parliament any longer. So really, it is a culture of entitlement, and Parliament is not doing us a favour by reducing it. They should simply scrap it once and for all.
No, absolutely. And one wonders, as you talk, Mathews, why has this been a culture that has existed? It's obviously something that has been in place for a while now. And South Africa has had many debates about our budget and really just trying to tighten our belts as a country. And this never really came up. And it is only now where robust discussions are happening about it. But why has this policy been in place for so long?
I think maybe for a couple of reasons. One is that we have a real lack of consciousness amongst many of our members of Parliament across political party line. I think this is one thing which unites members of Parliament across party lines, that they want to indulge themselves in these kind of freebies, a culture of entitlement, and so forth. I think we've seen a real collapse in our moral consciousness in the last decade or so, but in Parliament has been a particular epicenter of this kind of culture. You remember not so long ago, about 15 years ago, the majority of members of Parliament, it was so many, more than 200, were implicated in the Travelgate scandal. Many were convicted, some resigned, but the majority were allowed to pay back some admission of guilt fine, pay back the money, and continue as is. And it wasn't small amounts of money. It was hundreds of thousands of rands per person. And in some instances, it was naked corruption. So we've allowed this kind of culture of impunity to exist. Yes, these benefits were inherited from the previous apartheid, the old apartheid Parliament, but we are now 28 years into democracy. We should have nipped this in the bud long ago. We had the debate in 1994 when Madiba said, let's pay ministers a good salary, a very good salary, to avoid the temptation to corruption. But clearly that has failed because members of Parliament are the ones under whose watch state capture occurred. And the consequence has been that state-owned enterprises have collapsed, those workers have been retrenched, schools have been denied funding needed to to build decent toilets and materials for kids. We've not been able to invest in the economy, to rebuild infrastructure, to provide additional social grants for the poor. So there is a consequence when members of parliament fail in their duty, worse so when they are implicit in this kind of illegal activity and this kind of culture of entitlement. Yes, it might be symbolic, but there's a need to get rid of it once and for all, and for members of parliament to be leading from the front and to be seen to be modest and living a humble lifestyle. Our members of parliament like to emulate the examples or quote the examples of the late Julius Nyerere from Tanzania, Kenneth Kaunda from Zambia, and many others, esteemed leaders who led very modest lifestyles. So we hope these members of parliament of ours will begin to learn from those examples and to tighten their own belts before pleading those cases to workers across the country.
Here's the reason. I'm on Parliamentary's page now, Matthew. The reason that they gave for continuing with this policy, they say that they had numerous discussions with various stakeholders, as would be expected, during the finalization of the amended policy. But they say that their main reason was to bring about inclusive and equal dispensation across the board for everybody. So for them, it's all about being inclusive and affording people the equal access to these resources. And one would think that's a rather unfair statement to make based on what you mentioned a little bit earlier in terms of the public wage bill and many critical professionals working for government not getting increases that many would say they actually deserve.
I'm glad you read it to me. One needs a good laugh at times, but sadly this is a tragic case. So if you get, these 12 tickets a year as a former member of parliament and your spouse gets it, that will easily be worth, just one person's tickets would easily be worth about 60,000 Rand. So combined as a couple, your tickets could be worth 120,000 Rand. That's easily double what a cleaner gets in the public service. So that shows you the lack of consciousness of these former members of parliament. If they want equality, well, then let's fix the issue of the housing backlog. So you don't have people living in squatter camps in Philippi. Let's deal with the unemployment crisis of 46%. Let's deal with the horrific levels of violence that women and children face all the time, where police stations are badly under-resourced. Let's deal with the nurses who are having to fill 2 or 3 vacancies at once. Let's deal with doctors in public hospitals who are working 48-hour shifts. So let's deal with the queues at Social Nguvi public hospitals where people wait from 4 o'clock in the morning just to receive Panado. So if members of parliament or former members of parliament are serious, that's where the priority should be. It should not be about entertaining people who once upon a time were members of parliament, most of whom we can't even remember, let alone to be entertaining their spouses. It's a very bizarre scenario. There's no other workplace which does it, which says that as a workplace we are responsible to fly the spouse of a former employee around the country. That's bizarre. The person who is responsible to entertain that spouse is the person who married them, not the taxpayer. So really it shows you a sense of misplaced priorities and a complete lack of consciousness amongst these members of parliament who adopted this rule. So we hope they will review it and scrap it once and for all.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much, Matthew Parks of Cosatu there joining us to speak through that amended policy that speaks to the travelling of former members of parliament and their spouses. The amendment there is obviously that the tickets have been reduced from about 48 to 12 per annum, but obviously organisations like Cosatu calling for that to be scrapped entirely. You heard him say that it costs about 60,000 Rand a year for one person. So those policies need to be changed and really just the money redirected to sectors that are in absolute need of those funds.